Simon and I constantly get asked about our process for inspecting properties. Now, we were having a bit of a laugh off camera. I think we've inspected well into the thousands of properties now over the last 6 years as a business, and then obviously over the last 10 or 11 years as an investor. Now, I remember when I first started out, I was running around literally with my mate looking at about 10 to 15 properties a day. All I would do is take my phone, which was a little Nokia or something at the time, or a little flip phone, and a one-page notebook, and I'd just write the address and like 2 or 3 key points. Now, I remember at the end of those days, I was smashed. I couldn't remember one property from the next. And so once we started this business, we actually created an application that creates an automated report, and that's what we wanted to share with you today, the exact process for looking at the street, talking to the agent, looking at the inside and the outside of the property. So unlike me, you don't miss heaps of things and end up buying a few duds.
It's so fun spending that day out on the road as well. Like, you know, whenever somebody starts at the business, the first thing that we get them to do is get out there on the road, meet the agents, inspect the properties, go through this checklist to really learn the ins and outs. And it's what fueled that passion for me with property investing, like physically getting through a property, figuring out whether or not this meets the criteria, asking the agents sly little questions to try and get that little bit of inside information to begin the negotiations. It's just the best.
It is fun, man. Like I was saying to Simon, like I haven't been out there and done the full inspection day for a little while myself, and I don't think you have either.
Yeah, it's been a bit.
But like this process that we've got is so clean. And so I'm just looking at this report that we did for a client extremely recently in the last week. You know, this is a 29-page report, but we're just going to, you know, highlight some of the most important parts. The first thing that we always do when we get to an inspection, now, before we get to an inspection, we've talked about this in previous podcasts and videos, we rule out all of the properties that don't make sense. So we assume you guys have already picked your suburb, picked your streets, identified the type of property you want, and you're not just sort of doing what I used to do and running around looking at everything thinking it was getting you closer to your goal.
Yeah, for sure. Like it's already, we've already shortened the list down from say 40 properties that come onto the market in the areas that we look at down to about 10, and then get out there and actually check them out. So, you know, first things first, when you rock up to the inspection is always building that rapport with the real estate agent. Whether you've met them before, whether you haven't, you know, you really want to start to build a bit of a relationship with them, start asking them some questions about the property, about the market, about the suburb, just to kind of get a little bit more information and start to generate a bit of a relationship, because if agents trust you, they're going to open up a hell of a lot more.
Absolutely, man. So like when we get to the property, we generally ask, you know, what did the house recently sell for? Or we go to the property with that data, because you can find that on realestate.com sold section. You know, what's been done to the property since it was bought? When was the property built? What other sorts of simple questions do we ask the agent just to start that rapport process?
You definitely want to figure out whether or not it's tenanted, especially for us as investors. And if it is, how much is it currently rented out for, or when does their lease expire? That's a really important one. And then also, have you received any written offers, or how long's the property been on the market? Because you know, that's going to give you an indication of the urgency as well.
Now, I like to keep those questions pretty high level on the way in. It's, as Simon said, mainly about building trust and just having a bit of fun with the agent. Like, you've got to remember that their job's pretty tough. They're constantly negotiating. They're constantly getting hustled by people. So if you can be a nice person and make it a bit more fun at the start. Now, what I then do is go, look, do you mind if I spend 5 or 10 minutes walking around the property? I can do that on my own. I've just got a few things I wanted to look at. And then that's when we really get down to the suburb or the street level first.
Yeah, so we always like to look at the suburb, street surroundings. You know, once again, this can be done before the inspection as well on Google Maps. You know, figuring out where the major shopping centres are, where the schools are, where your public transport options are, you know, how far it is from a CBD or the beach or something like that. How far away is the train line? You know, if there's big, massive power lines nearby, if there's, you know, something nice like a park or anything like that nearby as well. You want to kind of get an understanding of where, you know, how close are all of these things? Is it walking distance? Do you have to get in a car and drive? Those types of things.
you know, one of the most important things at the street level is to go, would I or could I see myself raising my family here for the next 30 years? Now, as investors, a lot of us have $1 million like tastes, but we have 400K budgets. And so you don't always directly walk into a street and go, I would live here for the entire rest of my life. Like there's a bunch of properties that I own that aren't in that street, but you want that gut feel, like, would this be nice to live on? What are the percentages roughly of the mums and dads living on the street? You can tell that by cars with a small number of houses out on the street, as well as like manicured grasses and things like that, and gardens.
You can definitely tell.
You know what we're talking about.
Yeah. You drive through a street and those edges on the path are perfect. You know there's some owner occupiers there, eh? You drive past my old man's place and he's got like perfect lines, hey? It's amazing.
He's like built the soil level up about that high on the gutter, you know, those people.
Yeah, it's so good. But then you start to look at like the actual house and the block of land. So how big is the land? Obviously really important. What's the shape of the land is important to us as well. You know, I don't really love the odd shaped blocks because your yard space is all weird. If it's, you know, on an angle or you've got like a really narrow backyard or a really narrow frontage. So we just like your squares or your rectangles. Keep it simple, keep it basic.
Absolutely.
The frontage as well. I think frontage is important because, you know, it gives you obviously more access to the backyard if you've got that side access, and that helps for people if you want to put a shed in the back, a granny flat in the back. You know, some people with caravans or boats and things like that, if you've got that side access, you're just appealing to a bigger demographic, and wide frontages help that.
And we've found, you know, those sorts of things where there's space for a caravan or a tradies, whatever, or, you know, a boat or any of that sort of stuff, or a big shed out the back, it definitely adds value in terms of rent return, definitely adds value long-term on resale as well.
Yeah, then you got to obviously look at the house itself. You know, what is it built of? Is it brick, veneer? Is it timber weatherboard? Is it slab on ground? Is it raised on piers? Having a look at the parking as well. A lot of older places that are in high sets in Queensland have had the garages built into extra living space. You know, some of them have kept the car parking, but you know, it's always nice to have safe, secure off-street parking.
For sure, like there's so many different strategies as an investor, and you know, if you're just going for that traditional single income home, which we absolutely love, then car accommodation is important. It's even more important to a family in an expensive suburb with nicer cars. But then in many cases as well, if you're doing dual occupancy or maybe a secondary dwelling like a granny flat or even a subdivision, that parking can be absolutely vital to get that approval through the council. So that's a really important consideration, just to do a gut check. And then after you've done the inspection, check it out with the local town planner or council.
For sure. Now, we're not builders, very far from builders. So, you know, we don't know exactly the ins and outs of the quality of things, but we like to give it a score anyway, looking at absolutely everything: the roof, the gutters, the windows, the garden beds, what else? Like the eaves.
Everything. Like everything. Every single part of the outside of the home. So what's the condition of the bricks? What's the condition of the windows? What's the garden beds look like? Where's the grass at? Where's the driveway at? Like everything that you can possibly measure. It's just good to take a note, because if you're going out and looking at 5 properties in a day and you've got one that's worth 400K and one that's worth 410, but then you have a look back at this sort of report and you're like, well, the 400K one actually needs 25 grand worth of maintenance to improve it, where the 410 one is absolutely perfect, tenant ready for the next 15 years. I take the one that is easier, longer term to maintain. Yeah,
100%. And, you know, if you're going to be holding this property for the longer term, you want to make sure that you know what sort of work may be coming up. You know, if you've got rusty gutters and, you know, downpipes that are cracked and things like that, you know that that's going to be an expense pretty soon. Same as the water tank, the hot water system, you know, checking that out and seeing how old it was. Every single one will actually have a date, unless it's so old that the date's rubbed off.
Like most smart property.
Yeah, for reals. But, you know, especially if you're kind of stretching that deposit to purchase the house, you know, if you're spending lots of money just to purchase the house, but then you're not taking these things into account, and all of a sudden you settle on the property and you need to spend $10,000-$15,000 just to get some tenants in the property, you just want to do your best to try and avoid those little things. And some people get super emotional. This takes a hell of a lot of the emotion out.
Yeah, I love having a process for buying, because as Simon said, it completely removes the emotion, and then you can compare one apple versus another. So once you've gone through the outside of the property, and our recommendation would be to take a hell of a lot of photos. We normally take between 60 and 120 photos for each property we inspect, because not only do you want, your 0 to 5 rating for each of these things, but you also want photos to accompany it.
Yeah, the good thing to do, like if you don't have this specific report or something, you're just going out on the road by yourself, like what I would personally do is screenshot the realestate.com advertisement on Google,
a good idea.
And then start taking photos, and then you'll know exactly what property is what property.
Such a good idea, man. Like, I've just made that mistake that many times.
Yeah.
If I'd have just, before I hopped out of the car, screenshot it and then taken all the photos, and then that's clean, and then the next one.
Same
Such
thing.
a cool little idea.
But then obviously you jumping into the property, and we always are going to take a bit of a walk around the outside and the inside before we really get into the thick of this report. But once again, just getting into as much detail as you possibly can, having a look at the laundry, the bathroom, the kitchen, every single bedroom, the living area, the outdoor entertaining area, the garage, absolutely everything. Once again, taking a heap of photos. We like to step everything out as well to figure out how big the bedrooms are, the living space is.
For sure.
I like to take photos of like walls that might be able to be pulled down if they're not load bearing, to potentially open the floor plan up as well.
Definitely. Like, all of those things matter. So if you can, aim for second to fourth or fifth bedrooms that are at least 3 meters by 3 meters, and look for a master bedroom that's as big as possible. Same thing, like there's big bathrooms and there's small bathrooms. Generally what people pay for from a rental and a resale perspective is open plan living now. So kitchen, living, dining, onto outdoor living space, that's extremely valuable. And like you said, man, like as I'm walking around, I'm noticing, well, what if I pulled out that wall? Or what if I replaced the carpets in these rooms? Or there's no built-ins and the fans are really old. Like, what if I change that sort of stuff over? What about the window finishings? What's the quality look like?
Yeah, because a lot of that stuff is easy cosmetic stuff, and it doesn't,
So simple.
it doesn't cost a whole heap of money to paint the interior, replace some of the carpets, maybe replace some of the curtains, light fittings and things like that, and open up the floor plan a bit. You can really modernise a joint. Like when I first moved into my home, my partner walked through it and was like, I don't want to buy this joint. And I'm like, Tay, like if we spend like $20,000 on this before we move in, you're going to be completely blown away. And we did all of those things, replace the flooring, paint it internally, put some new window coverings up and things like that. And it just completely changed the whole vibe of the joint.
So epic. Now, how far into that budget of 20K are you now?
Oh my God. Times it by 5.
It's looking so fresh though.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, right? Like there's places to buy for yourself to live in with your family where obviously you're noticing everything, and then there's investments, and with those investments maybe you don't have to immediately do a kitchen, or maybe you don't have to rip into the bathrooms, or maybe you don't have to repaint the outside of the home. But it is definitely important to note, like if the kitchen's newer and you've got another 10, 15 years out of it, then that's a significant cost saving. If the kitchen's already falling apart when you buy it, then you're in it for a minimum of 15 to 30 grand, depending on how far you want to go. And this is so important as an investor, because so often we miss these little things on our first inspection. And I used to miss them completely, because I'd walk through the property and go, well, the worse the condition, the better, because it meant it was cheaper and I was buying below the middle price point in the suburb. But now that I've gone through those properties, yes, it's cheaper in the beginning, but if you've got to spend 100K in the first 10 years of owning it, then you would have been so much better off spending 50K buying the nicer place at the start and not having all those dramas or headaches and stuff you had to do.
And I've experienced this as well. Like I bought a couple of knockdowns that, I will knock down in the future, but it's just non-stop because they're so old and they're so run down. It's just like the hot water system blows, the air conditioning breaks, and people are still living in them. So you need to, keep them up to scratch, and plumbing issues and things like that. It's a pain in the arse, and fortunately the capital growth outweighs these things, but it's still like $2,000 to $4,000 per year, and it's like that's something that I've had to budget for. So it's really important to take that into consideration. It's like rundown properties do cost a fair bit of money to upkeep.
For sure. So what we recommend is just you starting to think about implementing a process that's going to make your life easier in the future. And so what that could mean is just planning a day, only looking at the properties that make sense high level before you get out there. And then when you get out there, as Simon said, take that snap before you walk in, ask the agent some better questions and build some rapport. Have a systematic approach to looking at the street, the inside and the outside of the property. Have a separate page for each of the properties that you inspect so that you can note some of this stuff. And then at the end of the day, you'll be able to get back on realestate.com with your notes and photos and make a much, much more educated, better investment decision.
Yeah, we just want to take a bit of that emotion out, create a system, make it a lot easier so that you're not getting too overwhelmed, because you're probably going to inspect 20 to 50 properties before you buy, maybe not 50, but up to potentially 20 properties before you buy one. It's like, it can become overwhelming, it can become really time consuming, but if you've got a strict process that you follow at every single property, it'll just make it a lot easier, and you know that if you just follow that system, you're going to get the information that you need to make a decision later that day or later that month whenever you're ready to buy it.
Love it, man. So we obviously wish you guys all the best out there. Have fun doing this stuff. Don't take it too seriously and don't stress out about it. When I was starting out, as I said, I'd just pen and paper 15 properties on a page.
Have some fun. It's why we invest, right?
Yeah.
It's finding those little hidden gems and figuring these things out. Like, it should be fun.
It's nice to do the work and to get out there without the pressure of it. So if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you haven't listened to us on the Pumped On Property Show, go check it out. We're also on Instagram and Facebook as well. But we truly wish you guys all the best and enjoy the journey.
Sweaty. So sweaty. Oh, that's good.